Morning, eighth grade. This week we will be doing chapter 27, sections 1 and 2, World War II. Hopefully, we can get through this next week totally. You will have your review on Thursday. It will be at 10 o'clock. And then you will have a test on Friday. And then we'll try to do the rest of the sections next week. So once again, review is Thursday at 10, and I'll send out all the information for the codes and whatnot on that later this week. All right. So we finished World War One. In our last section, yes, we're having to do some skipping because of time issues to get to World War II. I'd like to get us there, but during the 1930s, especially when you follow World War One. 1930s, get the Great Depressions going on, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. And many Americans believed that the U.S. should never really be involved in a war again. That was a very prevalent attitude. There was a very much an isolationist attitude, meaning, hey, we'll stay isolated from the world. We don't want to be involved in world events. But in the 30s, the war clouds kind of began to build again in Europe. Leaders that we're going to talk about here in a minute, like Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin, came to power, or Stalin had been in power and Mussolini since the 20s, and then Hitler in the 30s. So this is where we're at, moving through the 30s. But in Russia, a man named Vladimir Lenin, we talked a little bit about this at the end of our last section, staged a revolution. It's called the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917, and later he set up the Soviet Union. And then he died in 1924, and a man named Joseph Stalin came to power and soon ruled really as a dictator. The term is in your notes. It's a ruler who has complete power over a country. And Stalin was set up a totalitarian state, and he ruled viciously and cruelly. He was ever as much the tyrant or the madman, really, that Hitler was. But a totalitarian state is a state where a single party controls the government in every aspect of people's lives, where citizens must obey the government without criticism. Any criticism could lead to imprisonment, fines, or worse, or even execution. In the 30s, Stalin ordered peasants to hand over their land and their farm animals to join collective farms. These are farms run by the government. Many peasants, of course, this is their land. They refused to do that. Stalin, to give you an idea what kind of guy he was, he had millions of them executed for it. He created manufactured basically a mass. He blocked off an area, the Ukraine, where they couldn't get supplies, in essence, and these people starved in the tens of millions. He also wanted to expand industry, especially in steel and oil, because this was going to be critical to building his military up for his war machine. All this is going on in the 30s. Fascists in Italy, Benito Mussolini's fascist party, he rises and seizes power in 1922. And he plays on Italian anger about the Versailles Treaty. We talked a little bit about that. The end of World War I. The Italians did not like the treaty. It didn't give them the territory they wanted, among other things. Italy switched sides during World War I, and right in the middle of it. So they didn't get what they want. Of course, they're suffering hard times too. And Mussolini pounded on the Versailles Treaty. But once he was in power, he outlawed all political parties other than his own, which was the fascist party. He controlled the press, banned criticism of the government, and in schools, they controlled the schools. Children were taught the motto that Mussolini was always right. He was referred to as Il Duce, which means the leader. These type of governments whether they be a fascist or communist. I mean, they're all totalitarian governments in essence. They do the same thing. I mean, they control, they want to control the press. They want to control people's thoughts. They want to control the schools. The schools are very important. We're going to mention that here again in a section when we get into talking about Germany in a minute. Schools are very important to start to control the way the kids think very early on, telling them what they think, telling them what, the government, the leader is always right. This is stuff that we would think, we would hope that we'd think today is pretty dangerous. This kind of thinking, when, believing in one person who should rule all the time with absolute power. Mussolini invaded Ethiopia in 1935. He had talked about, bringing back the glory of the Roman Empire. The Ethiopian the emperor called on the League of Nations for help. And the League of Nations essentially didn't do anything. I think they did level some economic sanctions, but they didn't do much. This is going to be a recurring theme in this section and in the next. The League of Nations really didn't do anything, and that was an association of countries formed after World War I to protect the independence of all countries, and sort of, hey, we can all come to the table and work things out, and that's a nice thought. But when you're dealing with people like we're going to mention in this section, there is no dealing with them. I mean, they're gonna do what they want to do. But the League of Nations really was ineffective in what it was supposed to do. You're going to see a recurring theme on this in a second. All about the same time, in Germany, German dictator Adolf Hitler took advantage of anger about the Versailles Treaty as well, and then he pounded that as he came to power. The German people resented it, as the Versailles Treaty blamed them for the war. Hit them with heavy financial burdens and penalties. Reduced territory, took territory from them, and reduced their size of the military, among other things. So there was sort of that feeling in Germany, and Hitler tapped into that. He organized a political party called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and that's where you get Nazi from. Okay. That's in your notes, but he was part of that. Was his party. The Nazi Party came to power. Hitler also kept beating the same drum that the Germans did not lose the war. They were stabbed in the back by Jews and other traitors. Is why they lost the war. Didn't matter. That was just the message he kept pounding. And Hitler was a good orator, a good speaker. He had something about him that people listen to. We look at him today and think he looks almost comical. But people did listen to him. He had some skill as a political leader. And when the Depression hit Germany in particular, a lot of people turned to that strong man. They turned to Hitler because he looked like a strong leader who claimed he had all the answers to their problems. And all these things sort of lined up in a bad way for Germany, and Hitler becomes chancellor in 1933, and then ultimately within a couple years, democratic government just ended completely in Germany, and he's the dictator. He is fully 100% in charge, and in Nazi Germany, like Italy, like the Soviet Union, the government controlled press, schools, religion. He crushed all political rivals and created a militaristic type totalitarian state where he was der Fuhrer. I mean, he was the leader, and he was the unquestioned leader. You could not question a decision he made. So once again, these totalitarian states, they want to control these things. They want to control the information. These are not people who believe in freedom or liberty. They might believe in it for themselves, but not for everybody else. They do not want a difference of opinion. So all these, the three in particular ones we talked about, they all had this in common. The other thing that Hitler certainly did was launch attacks on the Jews, and he and the Nazis preached the message of racial hatred, claiming that the Germans belonged to a superior race, which he called the Aryan race. And he blamed the Jews, gypsies, communists on Germany's problems, but in particular, he focused on the Jews and started sending them, to concentration camps during the 30s. That's a term in there you'll have a definition of. That's actually where we'll pick up on the next lesson for the rest of this section in notes. But just be looking this over. Think of any questions you may have. We'll see you tomorrow.